Was punishment in ancient Persia truly about justice or something far deeper, far darker? When ash filled the lungs of Manas, was it retribution or ritual? What if I told you that in ancient Persia, justice wasn't about mercy or rehabilitation, but about cosmic balance restored through the most unimaginable suffering? Tonight, as you settle into your bed, I'm going to take you on a journey through one of history's most sophisticated yet brutally terrifying justice systems, where punishment wasn't just about crime and consequence, but about spiritual purification through agony. In the next 45 minutes, you'll discover why Persian kings believed that flaying a corrupt judge alive and using his skin as furniture was not just punishment, but sacred duty. You'll learn about execution methods so horrific that victims begged for death while trapped in chambers of ash, slowly suffocating on dust for days. And if you stay with me until the end of this dark journey, I'll reveal which ancient Persian punishment method is still secretly practiced in certain parts of the world today. But before we descend into this abyss of ancient cruelty, if you find these deep historical explorations both fascinating and disturbing, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Only 19% of you listening are actually subscribed, and your support helps me bring you more content that explores the darkest chapters of human civilization. Now, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and allow me to transport you back over 2 millennia to an empire where justice was dispensed not by the scales of law, but by the weight of cosmic truth, where every punishment was a ritual and every scream was a prayer to restore universal balance. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Fear. Persian justice philosophy. To understand the horror that was Persian punishment, we must first understand the mind that created it. The Persian Empire wasn't built by barbarians or madmen. It was constructed by some of the most sophisticated legal minds in ancient history. Men who believed that law was not just human convention, but divine commandment written into the very fabric of reality. Picture, if you can, the court of Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE. Massive stone columns reached toward painted ceilings depicting the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Persian nobles in flowing robes discuss matters of state, while scribes meticulously record every word. This wasn't chaos or primitive brutality. This was civilization at its most refined. Yet beneath the silken ceremony lay a justice system that would make modern horror writers weep with inadequacy. The Persians believed in something called Asia, cosmic truth and order. In their worldview, every lie told, every law broken, every act of corruption didn't just harm individual people. It tore holes in the fabric of reality itself. Justice, therefore, wasn't about rehabilitation or deterrence as we understand it today. It was about cosmic surgery, cutting out the infection of falsehood with whatever tools were necessary, no matter how sharp, no matter how deep. Herodotus, the Greek historian who both admired and feared the Persians, wrote that Persian children learned only 3 things: how to ride a horse, how to shoot a bow, and how to tell the truth. That final lesson wasn't moral guidance, it was legal training. In Persia, lying wasn't just wrong, it was cosmically dangerous, a crime against the universe itself. But what happens when a society places truth above mercy, cosmic order above human compassion? What happens when judges become priests and courtrooms become altars? We're about to find out, and I warn you, the answers are more disturbing than any fiction ever written. The Persian legal system operated on multiple levels, like a vast machine designed to process human suffering. Local courts handled minor disputes, theft, adultery, property disagreements. Each punishment was tailored not just to prevent repetition of the crime, but to create a living symbol of failure that would haunt both the victim and observers for the rest of their lives. The Persian understanding of symbolic justice extended even to the tools used. Thieves' hands weren't cut off with just any blade, but with specially crafted ceremonial axes engraved with verses from Zoroastrian texts about the sanctity of property. Liars' tongues were removed with golden knives, the purity of the metal serving to cleanse the world of their falsehood. Every aspect of the punishment was designed to reinforce the cosmic significance of the crime and its correction. Women faced their own particular horror. Female merchants caught in fraud might have their breasts mutilated or removed destroying both their ability to nurse future children and their status as women in Persian society. Adulteresses could face genital mutilation so severe that survival was unlikely, but death was not the goal. The goal was to create a walking lesson about the consequences of sexual transgression. The most horrific aspect of Persian mutilation was its permanence combined with the victim's survival. These weren't executions, they were transformations. A person entered the justice system as a complete human being and emerged as something else, something that served the state's purposes better than their original form ever could. They became living propaganda, mobile monuments to the power and reach of Persian law. Chapter 3. The Flayed Judge. When justice becomes art of all the punishments in the Persian arsenal, none captures the sophisticated brutality of their system better than the practice of flaying. The careful removal of human skin while the victim remained alive and conscious. This wasn't random cruelty or heat-of-the-moment violence. This was deliberate, ceremonial, and heavy with symbolism that still haunts us today. The most famous case, one that even the Persians' enemies acknowledged as real, involved a judge named Sisamnes who served under Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great. Sisamnes had been caught accepting bribes, corrupting the very process of justice that the Persian Empire held sacred. His crime wasn't just personal corruption, it was cosmic treason, a violation of the divine order that flowed through Persian law. Cambyses didn't simply execute Sisamnes. Instead, he ordered the judge to be flayed alive in the most public and ceremonial way possible. The process began with Sisamnes being stripped naked and bound to a stone platform in the center of Persepolis. There were thousands could witness what was about to unfold. The flaying began at the extremities. Fingers and toes first, the skin peeled back like the rind of a fruit. The goal was to keep Sisamnes conscious for as long as possible to ensure that he felt every inch of skin being separated from his flesh. Special techniques were used to minimize blood loss and prevent shock, including the application of heated oils that cauterized wounds as they were created. But the true genius of Persian flaying was in its pacing. The process could take hours, sometimes an entire day, with breaks built in to allow the victim to rest and recover enough strength to continue experiencing the torture. Sisamnes would have felt every nerve-ending screaming as his skin was slowly peeled away, layer by layer, inch by agonizing inch. The Persians had developed tools specifically for flaying that would make modern surgical instruments look crude. Razor-sharp blades with hooked ends could separate skin from muscle without damaging the underlying tissue. Specialized clamps held the skin taut while it was being removed. Heated iron sealed blood vessels to prevent the victim from bleeding to death too quickly. Let me walk you through the last hours of Menas, a Jewish high priest who had been caught collaborating with enemy forces during one of Persia's many border conflicts. His crime wasn't just political betrayal. In the Persian worldview, it was cosmic treason, a violation of the divine order that demanded the most profound form of purification. Menas was brought to the ash chamber at dawn, stripped naked, and forced to enter the sealed room through a door that would be locked behind him. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of engineering cruelty, approximately 10 feet square, with walls of polished stone that reflected no light. The floor was covered with ash to a depth of about 3 feet, fine as powdered silk and gray as a tomb. At first, Menas could stand comfortably in the ash, breathing normally, and perhaps even hoping that this was merely a form of imprisonment rather than execution. But the Persian engineers had designed the chamber with diabolical precision. Hidden vents in the walls could be opened and closed from the outside, controlling the airflow in the chamber. As the hours passed, these vents would be gradually sealed, making the air increasingly stale and difficult to breathe. The real horror began when Menas grew tired and could no longer stand upright. As his strength failed and he began to collapse, his face would come closer to the surface of the ash. Every breath would draw more of the fine particles into his nose and mouth. At first, this would cause coughing and choking, but as exhaustion set in and breathing became more labored, the ash would begin to coat the inside of his throat and lungs. Outside the chamber, Persian executioners operated a system of rotating paddles and fans that kept the ash in constant motion, ensuring that the air remained thick with particles. The sound of these mechanisms, a low, rhythmic whooshing, would be the last thing many victims heard, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the moments until suffocation. But the ash chamber wasn't designed to kill quickly. Persian engineers had calculated the precise amount of ash and air circulation needed to prolong the process for maximum suffering. Menas might survive for 12 hours or more, growing progressively weaker as each breath became more difficult and his lungs filled with ever-increasing amounts of dust. The psychological component of this torture was as carefully crafted as the physical. The victim knew exactly what was happening to them. They could feel their breathing becoming more labored, could taste the ash coating their throat, could sense death approaching 1 grain at a time. Unlike other forms of execution where death might come suddenly, the ash chamber provided hours of anticipation, hours of knowing that each breath brought them closer to suffocation. Persian priests would sometimes stand outside the chamber, chanting prayers and burning incense, transforming the victim's agony into a religious ceremony. They believed that the slow death by ash was a form of purification, that as the victim's breath was slowly taken away by the dust, their crimes were being literally ground out of their soul. The symbolism of the ash chamber went deeper than mere execution. In Zoroastrian belief, ash represented the remains of purifying fire, the residue left after truth had burned away falsehood. By forcing traitors to die breathing this sacred dust, the Persians believed they were completing a cosmic ritual that would restore the balance disrupted by the victim's crimes. Archaeological evidence suggests that multiple ash chambers were constructed throughout the Persian Empire, each one a testament to the sophisticated engineering that went into creating instruments of torture. The chambers were built with precise measurements. Too large, and the victim might find pockets of clean air. Too small, and death would come too quickly to serve its deterrent purpose. Some victims of the ash chamber were discovered days later, their bodies perfectly preserved by the fine dust that had killed them. These corpses became objects of both horror and fascination, mummies created not for the afterlife but as warnings to the living. The ash had filled every cavity of their bodies, their lungs, their stomachs, even their eye sockets, creating a grotesque sculpture that captured their final moments of agony. The ash chamber punishment was never used frequently. It was too elaborate, too expensive, and too time-consuming for routine justice. But its very existence sent a powerful message throughout the Persian Empire. Treason would be met not just with death, but with a death so unique and terrible that it would be remembered and feared for generations. Chapter 5. Scaphism, the boat of perpetual torment of all the punishments attributed to ancient Persia. None has captured the imagination of historians and horror writers quite like Scaphism, a method so grotesquely creative that many scholars have questioned whether it could possibly be real. Yet multiple ancient sources describe this torture in vivid detail, and the consistency of these accounts suggests that something very much like Scaphism was indeed practiced in the Persian Empire. The name comes from the Greek word scaph, meaning boat, and the punishment involved trapping the victim between two vessels while subjecting them to a slow death that combined starvation, exposure, and the horror of their own decomposing body being consumed by insects while they remained alive. Let me describe the case of Mithridates, a Persian soldier who was convicted of killing Cyrus the Younger in battle. His crime wasn't the killing itself. That was expected in warfare, but his boasting about the deed, which was seen as a violation of proper respect for royal blood. The punishment prescribed for Mithridates was aphism, a fate that would make him infamous in the annals of Persian justice. The process began with 2 boats or hollowed-out logs being brought to the execution ground. These weren't ordinary vessels, but specially constructed torture devices carved to fit together like a human-sized coffin. Mithridates was stripped naked and placed in the lower boat, his arms, legs, and head protruding through carefully cut holes. The upper boat was then placed over him, creating a sealed chamber that trapped most of his body while leaving his extremities exposed. But the real horror of Scaphism wasn't the confinement. It was what happened next. Persian executioners force-fed Mithridates massive quantities of milk and honey, far more than his stomach could handle. This wasn't done once, but repeatedly, several times a day, causing severe diarrhea that would coat his trapped body and the interior of the boats. The same mixture of milk and honey was then smeared all over his exposed flesh, his face, his arms, his legs. The purpose was diabolical: to attract every insect within miles to feed on the helpless victim. In the hot Persian climate, flies, wasps, beetles, and other pests would swarm to the sweetness, covering Mithridates' exposed skin in a writhing carpet of hunger. As the days passed, and Scaphism was designed to take days, the insects would lay their eggs in any open wounds or natural body openings. Maggots would begin to breed and feed on the victim's flesh while they remained fully conscious and aware. The combination of forced feeding, constant diarrhea, and insect infestation would create a horrific ecosystem of decay centered on the living human body trapped within the boats. Persian records suggest that victims of Scaphism could survive for weeks in this condition. They would be kept alive through the forced feeding regimen, watching helplessly as their own body slowly decomposed around them. The psychological torture was as devastating as the physical. Imagine being trapped, unable to move, watching insects consume your flesh while knowing that each day would only bring fresh horrors. The boats themselves became part of the torture. As the victim's body produced more waste and the insects brought in organic matter, the interior of the vessel would become a festering pool of corruption. The smell would be overwhelming, but the victim couldn't escape it. They were trapped in their own decomposition, breathing the stench of their rotting flesh until death finally brought relief. Greek historians who described Scaphism were clearly horrified by the concept, and some modern scholars believe the accounts were exaggerated propaganda designed to make the Persians appear monstrous. But the detailed consistency of the descriptions appearing in multiple independent sources suggests that something very much like this punishment was indeed used, at least occasionally, for the most serious crimes. The symbolism of Scaphism was as carefully crafted as its physical horrors. The boat represented the victim's journey from life to death. But unlike a normal funeral voyage, this was a trip that took weeks and left the passenger conscious for every mile. The milk and honey, traditionally symbols of abundance and sweetness in Persian culture, became instruments of torture, their very pleasantness perverted into agents of agony. The insects that consumed the victim were seen as agents of cosmic justice, breaking down the criminal's body and returning it to the natural order from which their crimes had separated them. In Zoroastrian belief, death by Scaphism wasn't just punishment. It was a form of accelerated purification that prepared the soul for judgment by forcing it to witness the corruption and impermanence of physical existence. Archaeological evidence for Scaphism is limited, which is not surprising given that the boats would have been destroyed by the very process they were designed to facilitate. However, Persian legal texts do contain references to punishments involving the boats of corruption and death by sweetness, suggesting that the practice was known within the empire's judicial system. The true horror of Scaphism lay not just in its physical torments, but in its complete destruction of human dignity. Victims were reduced to helpless witnesses of their own decomposition, unable to die quickly, unable to maintain any semblance of the pride and honor that Persian culture valued so highly. It was a punishment designed not just to kill, but to erase, to reduce a person to something less than human before finally granting the release of death. Chapter 6. Metal and Fire. The elemental instruments of divine wrath. The Persian Empire's relationship with punishment was deeply rooted in their understanding of cosmic elements and their symbolic power. When conventional methods weren't sufficient to address the magnitude of a crime, Persian justice turned to the primal forces of creation themselves, molten metal and sacred fire, transforming these elements into instruments of divine retribution that carried profound spiritual significance. The use of molten metals in Persian punishment wasn't random or crude. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual that combined physical agony with powerful symbolism about the nature of corruption and purification. Different metals were chosen for different crimes, each selection carrying its own meaning in the Persian understanding of justice and cosmic balance. Consider the case of Queen Parysatis, wife of Darius II, and one of the most powerful women in Persian history. Ancient sources describe her as brilliant, ruthless, and completely devoted to the concept of justice as cosmic purification. When she discovered that certain court officials had been embezzling gold from the royal treasury, gold that was considered sacred, blessed by the priests of Ahura Mazda, her response was as symbolic as it was brutal. The corrupt officials were brought before the queen in the great hall of the palace, surrounded by nobles and priests who would witness the administration of justice. Parysatis didn't simply order their execution. She commanded that they be killed by the very element they had stolen, molten gold. Heated to a temperature that would cause immediate and agonizing death, was poured down their throats while they were held immobile by Persian guards. The symbolism was perfect in its cruelty. These men had consumed the empire's wealth through their corruption, and now they would literally consume that wealth in its most purified form. The gold that had been their temptation became their execution, completing a circle of justice that satisfied both practical and spiritual requirements for cosmic balance. But the Persian use of molten metal extended far beyond simple executions. Court records describe elaborate ceremonies where different metals were used to match specific crimes. Silver, associated with truth and purity in Persian culture, was used to execute those convicted of spreading lies or corrupting religious ceremonies. The irony was deliberate. Those who had polluted truth would die through contact with its metallic symbol. Copper, considered a base metal associated with earthly desires, was used to punish those guilty of sexual crimes or violations of marriage law. Lead, heavy and poisonous, was reserved for those whose crimes had weighed down the cosmic order: traitors, corrupt judges, and those who had violated sacred oaths. The process of execution by molten metal was as carefully choreographed as any religious ritual. Persian metallurgists, who also served as priests in the Zoroastrian faith, would oversee the heating of the metals in sacred furnaces blessed by religious authorities. The temperature had to be precise, hot enough to cause immediate death, but not so hot that it would be over too quickly to serve its educational purpose. Victims would be restrained on specially designed stone platforms carved with religious symbols and prayers. Their mouths would be forced open using bronze implements blessed for this sacred purpose. As the molten metal was poured, priests would chant prayers asking Ahura Mazda to accept the sacrifice and restore the cosmic balance that had been disrupted by the victims' crimes. The most famous case of execution by molten metal involved the Roman Emperor Valerian, captured during his disastrous campaign against Shapura. According to Persian and Roman sources, Valerian was first used as a human footstool by the Persian king, a humiliation that demonstrated the complete reversal of power between the two empires. When Shapur finally tired of this psychological torture, he ordered Valerian's execution by molten gold. The choice of metal was deeply symbolic. Valerian had invaded Persia seeking to plunder its wealth, and now that wealth would become his death. The Roman emperor, who had dreamed of Persian gold filling his treasury, died with Persian gold filling his throat. The execution was conducted with full ceremonial honors, not to dignify Valerian, but to emphasize the cosmic significance of his defeat. Persian priests declared that the emperor's death by gold was a sign of divine favor, proof that Ahura Mazda supported the Persian Empire against all enemies. Fire, though sacred in Zoroastrian belief and generally avoided for executions, was occasionally used in the most extreme cases. When it was employed, the entire process became a religious ceremony of the highest order, with the victims burning serving as a sacrifice to restore cosmic balance. The Persian understanding of fire as a purifying element meant that execution by burning was reserved for crimes that required not just punishment, but spiritual cleansing. Those convicted of the most serious religious offenses, desecrating fire temples, corrupting sacred rituals, or blaspheming against Ahura Mazda, might face death by the very element they had insulted. But Persian fire executions weren't crude burnings at the stake. They were elaborate ceremonies involving specially constructed altars where the victim would be slowly consumed by flames, blessed by the highest religious authorities. The process could take hours, with the fire carefully controlled to maximize suffering while ensuring that the victim remained conscious long enough to experience the full, purifying power of the sacred flames. The psychological impact of these elemental executions extended far beyond their immediate victims. Witnesses would carry the memory of these ceremonies for the rest of their lives, sharing stories of what they had seen with family and friends. The image of corrupt officials dying by molten gold or religious criminals consumed by holy fire became part of the collective memory of Persian justice, serving as a permanent deterrent to future crime. Modern metallurgical analysis of ancient Persian execution sites has revealed traces of various metals that support the historical accounts. Furnaces capable of reaching the temperatures necessary for melting gold and silver have been discovered at several major Persian administrative centers, along with specially designed pouring vessels that could deliver molten metal with deadly precision. The elemental punishments of ancient Persia represent the ultimate fusion of practical justice and spiritual symbolism. They demonstrate how a sophisticated civilization could transform the basic forces of nature into instruments of cosmic retribution, creating punishments that satisfied both the earthly need for order and the divine requirement for balance. Chapter 7. The theater of public suffering, spectacle as social control in the Persian Empire. Punishment was never a private affair conducted behind closed doors. It was public theater, carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to educate, terrify, and control the population through the shared experience of witnessing suffering. The Persians understood something that modern criminologists have only recently rediscovered: that the psychological impact of punishment extends far beyond its immediate victim to encompass everyone who witnesses or learns about it. Persian cities were designed with punishment in mind. Every major urban center featured prominent public spaces where justice could be administered before large crowds. These weren't crude execution grounds, but sophisticated amphitheaters of agony, with raised platforms that ensured good sightlines, acoustic properties that carried the sounds of suffering throughout the surrounding area, and symbolic decorations that reinforced the religious and political messages being delivered. The transformation of individual suffering into collective education began with the selection of punishment sites. Persian engineers chose locations with careful consideration of their psychological impact. Executions and major punishments were often conducted at the main gates of cities, where travelers would encounter them immediately upon arrival. The message was unmistakable: this is what happens to those who violate Persian law, and this warning extends to visitors as well as citizens. Consider the case of a regional governor named Oropast who was convicted of corruption and treason during the reign of Darius I. His crimes weren't just administrative failures, they represented a violation of the trust placed in him by the king and, by extension, by Ahura Mazda himself. The punishment prescribed for Oropasts was designed to match the public nature of his crimes with an equally public demonstration of justice. Oropasts was brought to the central square of Persepolis during the midday market hours, when the maximum number of citizens would be present to witness his fate. He wasn't simply executed. He was transformed into a living lesson about the consequences of betraying Persian trust. The process began with his public humiliation, as town criers read out his crimes in detail while he stood naked and chained before the crowd. The actual punishment was impalement, but Persian impalement was far more sophisticated and brutal than the crude stakes used by other civilizations. Persian engineers had developed specialized techniques that could prolong the victim's suffering for days while ensuring they remained conscious and aware throughout the ordeal. Oropasts was positioned over a carefully crafted stake, not the rough wooden spear used by more primitive cultures, but a smooth, tapered bronze implement designed to cause maximum pain while avoiding immediate damage to vital organs. The stake was inserted through his lower abdomen and advanced slowly, inch by agonizing inch, while crowds watched and priests chanted prayers asking for divine approval of the proceedings. The Persian impalement process could take hours just to position the victim properly. Executioners used ropes and pulleys to control the descent of the body onto the stake, ensuring that gravity would do most of the work while allowing them to pause the process at intervals to maximize suffering. Special grease was applied to the stake to reduce friction and slow bleeding, increasing the chances that the victim would survive long enough to serve as an effective example. But the true genius of Persian public punishment lay in its psychological manipulation of the audience. Spectators weren't merely passive observers, they were required to participate in the process of justice. Citizens might be called upon to throw stones at the condemned, to spit on them, or to shout ritual denunciations of their crimes. This forced participation created a sense of collective responsibility for the punishment, making every witness complicit in the maintenance of Persian order. Children were especially encouraged to attend public punishments, not despite their young age, but because of it. Persian educational theory held that witnessing justice being administered was an essential part of moral development. Young Persians who watched criminals being flayed, impaled, or subjected to other tortures would carry those memories throughout their lives, serving as internal guardians against the temptation to commit similar crimes. The Persian understanding of public punishment extended to the treatment of the condemned person's family and associates. In many cases, relatives of serious criminals were required to attend the execution and participate in the ritual denunciation of their loved one. This served multiple purposes. It demonstrated that loyalty to family was subordinate to loyalty to the empire. It provided additional psychological torture for the victim. And it ensured that the criminal's social network was properly educated about the consequences of crime. Some of the most elaborate Persian public punishments involve the use of trained animals as agents of justice. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain execution sites featured pits containing lions, bears, or other predators that would be used to kill or maim condemned prisoners. These animal executions weren't random acts of cruelty, but carefully choreographed displays that demonstrated the Persian Empire's mastery over both human and natural order. The timing of public punishments was as carefully planned as their methods. Major executions were often scheduled to coincide with religious festivals or important state ceremonies, ensuring maximum attendance and reinforcing the connection between earthly justice and divine will. The Persian calendar included regular justice days, when accumulated criminals would be punished in elaborate public ceremonies that served as both entertainment and education for the population. Persian public punishments often included elaborate preliminary ceremonies designed to build anticipation and reinforce the gravity of the proceeding. Condemned prisoners might be paraded through the streets for days before their execution, giving citizens throughout the city opportunities to see them and contemplate their fate. These processions included musicians, priests, and official heralds who explained the crimes being punished and the justice being delivered. The aftermath of public punishments was as carefully managed as the events themselves. Bodies of executed criminals weren't simply disposed of, but were often left on display for extended periods, sometimes weeks or months, serving as permanent reminders of Persian justice. These corpses became part of the urban landscape, tourist attractions that visitors would seek out to understand the power and determination of Persian law. The psychological impact of these public displays extended throughout the Persian Empire and beyond its borders. Foreign ambassadors and merchants would return to their home countries with vivid accounts of Persian justice, spreading fear of the empire's power while also admiring its organizational sophistication. The reputation of Persian punishment became a diplomatic tool, deterring potential enemies while encouraging submission from conquered peoples. Modern psychological research has confirmed what the Persians understood intuitively, that public punishment creates lasting trauma, not just in its immediate victims, but in everyone who witnesses it. The shared experience of watching suffering creates powerful social bonds based on fear and submission, making populations easier to control and less likely to rebel against authority. Chapter 8, as the madness of absolute power. When justice becomes personal vengeance, as we near the end of our journey through the labyrinth of Persian punishment, we must confront perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this system. The moments when cosmic justice became personal vengeance, when the sophisticated legal framework that the Persians had constructed became a tool for settling private grudges and satisfying individual cruelty. The Persian Empire's emphasis on absolute royal authority created a dangerous situation where the whims of rulers could override even the most carefully crafted laws. When a king declared that cosmic balance required a particular punishment, who was qualified to argue? When the earthly representative of Ahura Mazda decreed that justice demanded suffering, what mortal judge could object? This divine authority created opportunities for some of history's most disturbing abuses of power, moments when sophisticated legal philosophy devolved into elaborate personal torture that satisfied the darkest impulses of absolute rulers. The case of King Cambyses II provides perhaps the most chilling example of how Persian justice could become Persian madness. Cambyses, son of Cyrus the Great, was known for his intelligence, his military skill, and his increasingly erratic behavior as his reign progressed. Ancient sources describe him as a man consumed by paranoia and rage, seeing enemies and traitors everywhere and responding to these perceived threats with punishments that went far beyond even Persian norms for brutality. One of the most infamous incidents involved Prixaspes, a trusted advisor who had served the royal family for decades. Cambyses had begun drinking heavily and had developed a reputation for making increasingly poor decisions while intoxicated. When Prixaspes gently suggested that the king might consider moderating his alcohol consumption for the good of the empire, Cambyses flew into a rage. Rather than simply dismissing or demoting Prixaspes, Cambyses devised a punishment that demonstrated both his archery skills and his complete descent into cruelty. He ordered that Prixaspes' young son be brought to the palace and positioned against a wall as a human target. Cambyses then drew his bow and announced that he would prove his sobriety by shooting an arrow through the boy's heart. The shot was perfect. The arrow struck exactly where Cambyses had aimed, killing the child instantly. But the king wasn't satisfied with this demonstration of his marksmanship. He ordered that the body be cut open so that everyone present could see how precisely the arrow had hit its mark. Prixaspes was forced to examine his son's corpse and confirm that the shot had indeed struck the heart, validating Cambyses' claim of sobriety. This incident reveals the terrifying contrariness that could creep into Persian justice when absolute power met personal instability. Cambyses had used the sophisticated apparatus of royal authority to commit what was essentially a random murder, transforming his palace into a torture chamber and his court into unwilling witnesses to his cruelty. But perhaps even more disturbing were the cases where Persian rulers used the justice system to satisfy their sexual desires and personal vendettas. Queen Amstrase, wife of Xerxes I, became infamous for punishments that seemed designed more to satisfy her personal sadism than to maintain cosmic order. One of the most horrific accounts describes Amstrase's treatment of her husband's mistress and the mistress's entire family. Rather than simply having the woman killed, Amstrase ordered a punishment that would destroy her slowly, while serving as a warning to other potential rivals for the king's affections. The mistress was subjected to systematic mutilation over a period of weeks. Her breasts, nose, ears, and lips were cut off in separate ceremonies, each one a public event that drew crowds of horrified spectators. But Amstrase wasn't content with destroying just her rival. She extended the punishment to the woman's mother, daughter, and sisters, subjecting them to similar mutilations while forcing the original victim to watch. The entire family was then buried alive in a specially constructed chamber where they were left to die slowly, while Amstrase held banquets above ground, the sounds of the victim's suffering providing macabre entertainment for her guests. The punishment had no legal justification. It was pure personal vengeance dressed up in the trappings of royal justice. These cases of perverted justice weren't isolated incidents, but represented a systematic problem within the Persian system. The combination of absolute power, sophisticated torture techniques, and a legal philosophy that placed cosmic order above human compassion created perfect conditions for the emergence of sanctified sadism. Persian records contain dozens of similar cases where rulers used their authority to satisfy personal grudges, sexual desires, or simple bloodlust. A provincial governor who had offended the king might find his entire family subjected to elaborate tortures that served no legal or educational purpose. A priest who had questioned royal policy might be subjected to punishments that violated every principle of Zoroastrian justice, while being justified as necessary for cosmic balance. The transformation of justice into personal vengeance was facilitated by the Persian understanding of royal authority as divine mandate. Once a king declared that someone had violated cosmic order, no earthly authority could question that judgment. The sophisticated legal framework that had been designed to maintain truth and justice became a tool for sanctifying the darkest impulses of absolute power. This corruption of justice had profound effects throughout Persian society. Citizens learned to live in constant fear, not just of violating written laws, but of offending powerful individuals who might use the justice system to satisfy personal vendettas. The predictability and fairness that should characterize any legal system gave way to arbitrariness and terror. The psychological impact of this perverted justice extended beyond immediate victims to encompass entire communities. When people saw that even faithful service and careful obedience couldn't protect them from the whims of absolute rulers, social bonds began to break down. Trust in institutions eroded, and the very cosmic order that Persian justice was supposed to protect began to collapse under the weight of its own contradiction. Chapter 9. The Archaeological Evidence. When stones tell stories of suffering as we approach the conclusion of our journey through Persian justice, we must address a crucial question that has haunted historians for centuries. How much of what we think we know about Persian punishments is real? And how much is exaggeration, propaganda, or outright fiction? The answer lies buried in the archaeological record, in the physical evidence that survives, when all the witnesses are dead and all the propaganda has crumbled to dust. Modern archaeology has provided a complex and sometimes surprising picture of Persian punishment practices. While some of the more extreme accounts from Greek historians appear to be exaggerated, the physical evidence confirms that Persian justice was indeed as sophisticated and brutal as the sources suggest, though perhaps not quite as randomly sadistic as their enemies claimed. Excavations at major Persian administrative centers have uncovered execution sites that match descriptions in ancient texts with disturbing precision. At Persepolis, archaeologists have found stone platforms carved with drainage channels designed to carry away blood and other bodily fluids during public execution. The precision of these installations suggests that Persian punishment was indeed conducted with the administrative efficiency and attention to detail described in historical accounts. Perhaps most chilling are the discoveries at Pasargadae, where excavations have uncovered what appears to be a purpose-built torture complex complete with specialized chambers for different types of punishment. One chamber, sealed for over 2 millennia, contained a thick layer of fine ash mixed with human bone fragments, possible evidence for the ash suffocation method described in ancient sources. Analysis of this ash reveals that it was specially prepared, ground to an unusually fine consistency that would indeed create the suffocating dust cloud described in historical accounts. The presence of human remains mixed with the ash suggests that this chamber was used multiple times over an extended period, making it a production facility for death rather than the site of a single execution. Metallurgical analysis of Persian execution sites has revealed traces of various metals consistent with the use of molten substances in punishment. Furnaces capable of reaching temperatures necessary for melting gold and silver have been discovered at several locations, along with specially designed pouring vessels that could deliver liquid metal with deadly precision. Perhaps most significant are the human remains that have been discovered at various Persian sites. Skeletal analysis has revealed evidence of the systematic mutilation described in ancient sources, clean cuts made with sharp instruments, patterns of bone damage consistent with methodical torture, and signs of healing that suggest victims sometimes survive their initial punishments only to be subjected to additional suffering. One particularly gruesome discovery at Susa involved a mass grave containing the remains of several dozen individuals who had been subjected to various forms of mutilation before death. The precision of the cuts and the pattern of injuries suggests that these weren't battlefield casualties or victims of random violence, but the products of systematic judicial punishment. Chemical analysis of Persian execution sites has also provided insights into the methods used. Residues consistent with the milk and honey mixtures described in accounts of Scaphism have been found at several locations, along with evidence of the insects and decay that would result from such punishments. The archaeological evidence also confirms the public nature of Persian punishments. Execution sites are consistently located in prominent positions within Persian cities, often adjacent to main gates or central squares where large crowds could gather. The design of these facilities with raised platforms and excellent sightlines confirms that Persian punishments were intended as public spectacles rather than private judicial proceedings. Particularly telling are the discoveries of what appear to be viewing areas, stone benches, and elevated platforms positioned to provide optimal views of execution sites. These facilities were clearly designed to accommodate large audiences, confirming the accounts of Persian punishments as public entertainment and education. The preservation of human skin, described in accounts of judicial flaying, has been partially confirmed by archaeological discoveries. While no complete examples of preserved human skin have been found, chemical analysis of certain artifacts has revealed traces consistent with the tanning and preservation processes described in ancient sources. Modern forensic analysis has also shed light on the medical aspects of Persian punishment. Examination of skeletal remains has revealed that Persian executioners possessed sophisticated understanding of human anatomy, knowing exactly how to inflict maximum pain while avoiding immediately fatal injuries. The precision of torture wounds suggests that Persian torturers received extensive training in their craft. The archaeological record also provides evidence for the religious aspects of Persian punishment. Execution sites are consistently associated with religious symbols and ritual objects, confirming that Persian justice was indeed viewed as a form of worship rather than simple law enforcement. Carbon dating of execution sites reveals that Persian punishment practices remained remarkably consistent over several centuries, suggesting that these weren't random acts of cruelty, but systematic policies implemented across the empire over extended periods. The standardization of torture techniques across vast geographical distances confirms that Persian punishment was administered according to detailed protocols rather than local improvisation. The discovery of Persian legal documents has provided additional context for understanding the punishment system. Clay tablets containing court records confirm that extreme punishments were reserved for specific categories of crime and were administered according to formal legal procedures rather than arbitrary royal whim. Perhaps most significantly, the archaeological evidence suggests that while Persian punishments were indeed brutal, they weren't necessarily more cruel than those employed by contemporary civilizations. Similar evidence of systematic torture and public execution has been found at sites throughout the ancient world, suggesting that Persian justice, while sophisticated in its cruelty, was not unique in its brutality. The physical evidence also provides insights into the effectiveness of Persian punishment as a social control mechanism. The careful design and prominent placement of execution sites, combined with evidence of long-term use, suggests that Persian punishments did indeed serve their intended purpose of deterring crime and maintaining social order. Chapter 10: The Eternal Echo. How ancient cruelty shaped modern justice. As we reach the end of our dark journey through Persian punishment, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. The sophisticated cruelty of ancient Persia didn't disappear with the fall of the empire. Its echoes can be heard in modern legal systems, in contemporary debates about justice and deterrence, and in the ongoing human struggle to balance order with compassion. The Persian understanding of punishment as cosmic restoration, rather than simple deterrence or rehabilitation, continues to influence legal thinking today. The concept that certain crimes require suffering to restore universal balance appears in modern discussions of capital punishment, where advocates argue that some offenses are so heinous that only death can provide adequate response. The Persian practice of public punishment as education and deterrence has evolved into modern media coverage of criminal justice. While we no longer force citizens to watch executions in person, television coverage of trials, sentencing, and even executions serves a similar function, transforming individual punishment into collective moral education. The Persian emphasis on making punishment fit the crime symbolically, rather than proportionally, can be seen in modern discussions of poetic justice, the idea that criminals should suffer consequences that mirror their offenses. This concept influences everything from victim impact statements to the design of prison sentences that attempt to reflect the nature of the crime, rather than simply its severity. Perhaps most troubling are the modern instances where Persian-style systematic cruelty has re-emerged in contemporary conflict. The use of torture as psychological warfare, the deliberate infliction of suffering to send political messages, and the transformation of punishment into public spectacle all echo the Persian model with disturbing precision. The Persian integration of religious authority with legal power continues to influence modern legal systems, particularly in regions where theocratic governments combine spiritual and temporal authority. The Persian concept of crime as cosmic disruption appears in modern legal systems that treat certain offenses as sins requiring purification rather than simply violations requiring punishment. The archaeological evidence of Persian punishment has also contributed to modern understanding of the relationship between state power and individual suffering. The systematic nature of Persian cruelty, its administrative efficiency, and religious justification provides a historical model for understanding how sophisticated societies can embrace and institutionalize human suffering. Modern forensic science has benefited from the study of Persian punishment techniques, providing insights into historical torture methods that help contemporary investigators understand evidence from crime scenes and conflict zones. The Persian emphasis on preserving victims' suffering has inadvertently created a historical record that serves modern justice. The Persian example also provides crucial insights into the psychology of power and its relationship to cruelty. The transformation of Persian kings from just rulers into sadistic tyrants illustrates how absolute authority can corrupt even the most sophisticated legal systems, a lesson with obvious relevance to contemporary discussions of governmental power and accountability. Perhaps most importantly, the Persian example demonstrates how easily the pursuit of perfect justice can become the justification for perfect cruelty. The Persian Empire's sophisticated legal philosophy, its emphasis on truth and cosmic order, and its detailed attention to procedural fairness coexisted with levels of systematic brutality that rival anything in human history. This paradox, the coexistence of legal sophistication with institutionalized cruelty, appears throughout human history and continues to challenge modern legal systems. The Persian example suggests that procedural fairness and philosophical sophistication provide no protection against the abuse of power, when that power is considered absolute and its exercise is considered sacred. The study of Persian punishment also reveals the danger of treating justice as ritual rather than practical problem solving. When legal proceedings become religious ceremonies and punishments become acts of worship, the human suffering involved becomes sanctified rather than regrettable, making it easier to justify and more difficult to reform. Yet the Persian example also demonstrates the human capacity for creating meaning from suffering, for transforming individual pain into collective purpose. While we may reject the specific methods used by Persian justice, we can recognize in them the universal human desire to believe that suffering serves some greater purpose, that pain can be redemptive, and that order can be restored through sacrifice. The Persian understanding of punishment as permanent transformation, the idea that justice should leave lasting marks on both criminals and society, continues to influence modern debates about criminal justice. The Persian practice of turning criminals into living warnings echoes in modern discussions of sex offender registries, public shaming penalties, and other forms of permanent social marking. The Persian integration of individual punishment with community participation appears in modern restorative justice programs that seek to involve victims, criminals, and community members in the process of addressing crime. While modern approaches emphasize healing rather than suffering, they share with Persian justice the understanding that crime disrupts social order and that restoration requires community involvement. The Persian emphasis on making punishment educational extends into modern criminal justice through programs designed to use individual cases as teaching opportunities. Court TV victim impact statements and public service campaigns that feature criminals discussing their crimes all reflect the Persian understanding that individual punishment should serve broader social purposes. As we close this exploration of Persian punishment, we must acknowledge that we carry within ourselves the same capacity for both justice and cruelty that characterized ancient Persia: the human desire for order, the need to believe that wrongdoing will be punished, and the satisfaction derived from seeing enemies suffer. These are not ancient artifacts, but contemporary realities that shape our modern world. The Persian example teaches us that the most dangerous societies are not those without laws, but those whose laws become too perfect, too systematic, too convinced of their own righteousness. When justice becomes a machine operated by those who believe themselves divinely authorized, when punishment becomes ritual rather than remedy, when suffering becomes sacred, that is when civilization becomes its own enemy. The echoes of Persian punishment remind us that the price of order is eternal vigilance, not just against chaos, but against the human tendency to transform the pursuit of justice into the worship of suffering. The Persian Empire created one of history's most sophisticated legal systems and one of its most systematic programs of institutionalized cruelty. These were not contradictory achievements, but complementary ones, and that should terrify us more than any individual act of ancient brutality. In the end, the story of Persian punishment is not just ancient history, but eternal warning. It reminds us that the capacity for both great justice and great cruelty lies within every legal system, every society, and every human heart. The question is not whether we will choose between them, but whether we will recognize when one is transforming into the other. And perhaps that is the most important lesson we can learn from our journey through the darkness of Persian justice, that the greatest horrors in human history have always been committed by those who believed they were serving the greater good. And the most dangerous enemies of human dignity are often those who speak most eloquently about human values. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you live in an age where justice is imperfect but human, flawed but improvable. And remember that the price of keeping it that way is constant awareness that even the most sophisticated civilizations can lose their way when they forget that laws exist to serve humanity, not the other way around. The Persian Empire fell over 2 millennia ago, but the questions it forces us to ask about justice, power, and human nature remain as urgent today as they were in the courts of Cyrus and Darius. How much suffering are we willing to accept in the name of order? How much power should we grant to those who promise to protect us? And how will we know when the cure becomes worse than the disease? These are the questions that ancient Persia's legacy forces us to confront, and they are questions that every generation must answer anew. The echoes of Persian punishment will continue to reverberate through history as long as human beings struggle with the eternal challenge of creating justice without becoming monsters ourselves.